Hell yeah. So we got to the Lochsa, and we're going to go over the highlights first. We have about a minute of highlights. And so we do some pretty good surfing. Now this is sandy beaches. This is kind of right at the beginning. And we enter this hole from the eddy. And it's real wide, it's really long, and so it really side surfs the boat. And sorry about that printer noise. But anyway, and let's watch this all the way through. So that was kind of the first highlight. And then right off the bat, there's all these little pocket holes that are probably some of the best for an R1 just to kind of get side surfed in. So this is a real good one. Now some of these you got to be careful that they're not backed up by rocks. And so if you do fall in, you're not going to get like slotted. And so holding onto the boat is pretty good. But this one I was actually able to get more stable. So that first surf is just like, well, don't jump out of the boat, when high siding. It's kind of a balance of like not, high siding enough and not jumping out. And so in today's footage, right in the middle of the boat where my feet are, you have this plank of wood. And then underneath it is a curved piece of foam. So that's pushing down on the I-beam in the middle. And that printer is just going to drive me crazy. Anyway, and then so here's Lochsa. And so this kind of ends the highlight. And Lochsa is so you have that big kind of boily, you just have a huge upwelling chunk of water. So we will look at this one again. On the left right here, you know what I mean? It's always going to tip the boat. Like once you're actually driving through, and so you have the initial hit. And the initial hit, it can flip you in any direction. Like this can for sure flip you to the right. Over here, this can flip you to the left. And so, and I really want to just try to gut this just so I have good, just good instincts on how to, run big waves and charge through. But I misjudge Lochsa all the time, just knowing that as you do go through, this is just going to turn the boat just like this wall of water. It upwells, and because you have all the water coming down, there's just a submerged rock right here, and it tacks up all the water, creates the kind of like a almost, I don't know, like a reverse eddy, but essentially it just builds up just a wall of water, and that dense water, there's nothing you can do. It's at an angle. And so that's the angle that's going to get created. And it's just fascinating. I had to jump out right here, and that was a good skill, just so the boat's not going to flip. And so that you kind of have to get used to be like, hey, should I jump out? And then I can keep the boat from flipping. So that's what I did. Did a bad job right there, but then jumped out and saved the boat from flipping. Hell yeah. And then I can just climb in a little bit easier. So we're actually going to go to the very beginning of this, because this first surf on sandy beaches, this is kind of a deep hole. And even these are kind of unfriendly places. The fact that your boat gets completely stuck, you know what I mean? And so like right here, and this is just kind of a bad way to just lean back. And I already kind of, I'm almost falling out. Like right here, I can't even breathe air because I'm like totally submerged. So that's where I'm just like, uh-oh. And I just made sure to hang on because I wouldn't want to fall out in a keeper hole where if you fall out, you're going to get sucked back into the hole and then maybe go deep. But this one, and that's really difficult to gauge. Once you're in one of these holes, they just feel like dangerous places, like they feel like they're going to recirculate. But this one doesn't have super flat gradient behind it. I don't think it would surf a body, But it's still, when you're kind of new to judging dangerous locations, like there's obviously holes that for sure could just body recirc you, and those would be, you wouldn't want to go into those. So I kind of choose wisely, hopefully, the locations that I want to try to side surf, but also practice hanging on. So this one was real good. I'm glad I was able to And then even just that catch, you know, sometimes I'll miss things so much because they're super intimidating to drop into. You know what I mean? I didn't really want to drop into the meat of this and then just do like a big high side almost to a flip. So I kind of just, so I'm just almost even eyelashing this, but this is real good to be like, hey, turn the boat down into a surf and then just jump for this high side. And that surfs me back into this side surf. So that seemed to work out pretty good. Hell yeah. And then the other thing is that I have this bar in my boat, so now if I am side surfing, I can release more of this tube over here. And so that's also, that's going to drive me crazy too. So hell yeah. Yeah, and so that was just, and this is just right off the bat, you know, on the trip. And it's a good place to go kind of big because everyone was grouped up. You know, if I do get separated from my boat, kind of not a big deal because the swims are real mild, a lot of separation between the rapids. Now, the only other highlight was this shoestring falls. There's this hole on the left side, and it's just always a good one to go, you know, throw yourself at that. And so hell yeah. Yeah, and if this one to eyelash on the right side is a real good one because the back of the boat, especially when hitting holes, you always have to be, what's going to happen to the back of the boat, especially if you are jumping to the front, because if you jump to the front and then the back catches current, and that's where having a boat that's more rockered could be useful, to be like, hey, if I do jump to the front, the back is actually not hitting, you know, it's not sucking water. On this particular rapid, over here on this side, there's so much current going on that left seam that if I just push into this hole right here, the back of the boat's going to just kind of go into a flip. And so that's where I have flipped, where the front of the boat will stop right here, the back of the boat keeps going, and it does a corkscrew flip on that one. And so, hell yeah. And then we got Lochsa. All right, so hell yeah. We have pretty poor footage today, you know, because I was just, I have my camera mounted to the back of the boat on a thwart, and so, but we're gonna see how much we do. So we kind of start the trip. But yeah, a little bit of the dynamics. So I do have. Yeah, let's get facing forward. So right here underneath in the middle of the boat, I do have a plank of wood, and it pushes down on the center I-beam, and it kind of makes that more high rockered, and it gives me edges. When I'm just sitting over here on the left, the right side of the boat is kind of up out of the water. But then right there, when I shift to the right, now the left side's up out of the water. And so for my style of boating, like I think this is one of the more important kind of improvements you can make to an R1 boat. Now, it's a genre because there's a lot of people that potentially don't want that. They want a paddle cat, very railed style boat, very wide and railed. And I get that. My style is for sure more round boat, round underfoot, and then have this. And then even on the road trip back, I was thinking, just because something is underfoot dynamics doesn't mean that you can't have like the top surface. This top surface could be a total rectangle, and I think that would be good. We do those side surfs, and I think it would make sense to have a more rectangular shape, especially above the waterline. Things that can add secondary stability when you are sideways. And so, hell yeah. And I thought I was going to catch some of these holes. We don't. And let's just jet forward to, so this is, we're going to watch some boats go by, and then we're going to peace out. Hell yeah. And this is This is kind of the first. This is Fish Creek and around the corner of Sandy Beaches. And so what I really have to do is to be more precise, especially on waves that are fairly, even some of these big waves, they're intimidating a little bit. And you're just like, I don't want to bite off more than I can chew and stuff like that. But a lot of these, especially on the Lochsa, are very clean. And so if you are in an environment where you're able to hit some clean waves, and then we're just not watching anything. Let's maybe watch this catch an eddy, see if we do anything here. Yeah, just body shifting, wading into the slower location. Like if the boat's going into the slower location and you are on that slower water, that's going to capture, you know what I mean? So that's the cool thing that I noticed. And the biggest improvement is that chunk of wood pushing out that I-beam and having edges, because then I can, you know, kind of edge my boat. It's basically, it turns your R1 raft into like two canoes. When you're on one side, you have this width and it's faster, but you have all the stability of the other side. And so, and you still have this right here being weighted, so you have a cantilever. And so that in my new prototype, the rocker is so extreme that if you have too extreme of a rocker, you lose your cantilever effect. If it's just kind of like a rounded basketball underneath you, like this, if this gets any higher, it for sure loses its cantilever effect. And this is Sandy Beaches. This is, and I try to hit this on the fly. And see, we're just too conservative. I just don't want to drop into that thing sideways, but I should. You know, now that I have actually surfed it and gone sideways, I've just actually never caught this surf, and it just, it's a trough, man. And I really actually haven't, you know, seen this at low water to see if it's backed up by anything. That's always the risk, that there's like a clamshell or just more rocks behind it. You know what I mean? Like the rock in front of it's creating the pour over, creating the vacancy behind it. But if you get this vacancy and then beyond that is just like a resting rock, then, you know, in this trough, if you get thrown out, you're going to go deep and then pushed into something. And so that's always when surfing, if you're able to hang on to your boat, hell yeah. And we'll see if we catch this eddy. Yeah, and then even this is kind of what I learned today, that if you do have, this is maybe more for my reference. What am I going to call this, you know? But this I-beam, if I have this center I-beam pushed out and I have edges. If I have an R1 boat with edges, then I can more easily track on that tube and like catch eddies, ferry across rivers. I think it is, because what's happening is the other side, if I'm on one side and the other side, and this takes me a little while, but we get around, the other side of the boat is not helping. And so that's what I have found. If you do have an edgeable boat, like even just like right here, if this is, you know, if this is tacking into this water, maybe that's not useful. Maybe, you know, having your ability to put all the water line on the weighted tube that you're on, and it makes that water line effectively longer. And so in an R1 design, I'm trying to, you know, you want to have an effective long water line for speed, and then at times you want those, you want release and a lot of rocker. Those two sometimes don't go together. But yeah, and then this, I think I want to be able to, you know, high side, like looking up river like I am surfing in this position. But this, you know, to me, I just fall out. And so that's something that even in this boat, I'm willing to actually add foam, like right here, because this rounded tube, the second I pop out of it, you know, I almost need so what I would do on this is to actually foam out like right here, just right under the perimeter line or something. So if I do slip out, I have something to sit on. And then even use that as secondary stability, like when that edges and that goes in the water, it helps more balance. So you can edge on that, and it kind of controls how much you're going to edge, and it prevents like edging too much. Because I want to edge, and you can almost, I'm just going to say, is like you need to edge. This is such a troughed wave that if this wasn't in here and I wasn't able to edge, and I'm just sucking water right now. That was it was a little bit spooky because I'm just like, well, I know my boat's not getting out. And that's the thing. If this was a hella retentive hole, it'd be kind of scary just to be like, well, especially if my head's underwater and I'm losing breath and I fall in and it body surfs you. But this one should be, I'll be able to go next week to the Lochsa, and I could spend some time on this one, even almost set up a camera just to show. And that was what I kind of wanted to do, because the boat footage doesn't show much, but I can always just talk over the dynamics of what's going on. But just in the R1 world, to progress this sport, it requires a lot of the athletes to go charge at holes like these, because these holes are going to exist on Class 5 runs that you're going to, one, just try to bust through, but two, get caught in and then use. Like, let's say, this is a pretty big hole, but it's still one where it's middle size, where if this was on a Class 5 rapid, you could enter this hole, get chowdered it out, and then exit on the other side, and maybe you're going to use this hole as a tool to get across a feature. Now, I would say that's actually extreme. So that's really cool that this Class 3 rapid has this size of a hole that could be used for a Class 5 maneuver. You know what I mean? Just by figuring out the dynamics, the stability, and that's I will mention this because I notice a lot of the R1 boaters that are kind of pushing the limits, they're not seeking out features like this. They're not, and sometimes it's just having access. This Lochsa is a special river because the swims are just real mild, and then the waves and potentially holes. It probably has some of the safest holes, even though there's some holes that could get nasty. At low water, I've actually looked at most of the big holes, and they're not backed up by rocks. They're not backed up by sieves. None of this is a sievey river, and so that's kind of interesting. Hell yeah, so we're going to be done with that one. But it's using those Class 3, 4 high water, even I'll call that Class 3, just huge Class 3 features. I guess you'd call it Class 4 if they're going to flip you and stuff. But basically using those to figure out the dynamics for big water Class 5, I think is important. All right, hell yeah. Now, the footage isn't that great today, but I definitely wanted to talk about kind of paddling. So like right here, my boat's angled, all this is freed up. And the crazy thing is I'm making R1 boats with prototypes, but we were going to just go back just a little bit because this boat underfoot is pretty much ideal. That's the crazy thing, is it doesn't need to be changed much, and I actually can add to it. Like I said, squaring out the top stability doesn't interfere with the underfoot stability, and that's what we're going to find from this one. We're going to be sideways in this hole as well. And see how I'm trying to charge after. I was being conservative, and now can I even make it? I was just really happy to capture this. Heck yeah. But now we're sideways, and the dynamics are I don't want my boat to catch. This is just going to pop up all the time. I got to be okay with that. I don't want my boat to catch on the upstream, so that's why we do have the floor pushed out with that I-beam. I am edged, and so this is real important because now it's not gripping. Let's watch until it does grip, because right there it does grip, and that grips almost too much. And so even like right there, I should be looking at kind of the dynamics. And right here is if I actually did have that extra sponson, out here where I would sit on it, that would actually just grip and catch more. So that would be worse. So that's kind of interesting. But I think if you had, and I don't know, it's just more, if I did have this rectangular and I did have sponson material out here that's higher, maybe you would just actually catch to a flip. A lot of the things, I'm just kind of high hopes where I'm just like, well, I just know that there's this idea that if you have, like if I did have a square boat over here and you did, you would get lengthwise stability. So if you did have some sponsoned tubes, some secondary stability on the front and back that's more rectangular, then when this boat goes up into this high side, at least it could be more consistent. But that might not even be true, because in a hole, like the back of the boat right now is on the exit, and this is on the cot part. So if the back of the boat actually catches, it's going to turn, and that's what happens, like even, and that's kind of interesting. I would have assumed this has a likelihood to turn the other way, get that back to exit. It actually turns up into the hole this direction, so that's kind of interesting. And I think, yeah, more of a round boat for sure. And I should be looking at this from a kayak perspective, because a kayak, is going to side surf, but then the only way to get the kayak around is because their sterns are lower volume. And so this hole's kind of nasty. But if it's one of the wave holes like at the wave parks out east, getting the stern to pivot in that wave because of a low volume stern, that would be kind of interesting. And that's what I want to explore, is like when you are side surfing some of these big features, like, hey, can we actually get the boat to go, surf upstream again? That's one of the things that I want to experiment with. All right, hell yeah. So I think, I don't know. I think we're going to almost be done with this video. I think this was good. A lot of the highlights came from the first location. I don't mind making part 1 and part 2, going through this rapid, just because I definitely want to see in this footage is if there was any times where I can talk about the actual paddling and paddling dynamics. But I do like this boat, the fact that it catches waves. It's very rounded underfoot, and with that I-beam pushed out, I do have edges. And so if I do go up into this wave, it's rockered front to back. That could get better, just because even like right here, that back on some of these, and this happens in paddle cats, is that you go up like right here, but then the back of a paddle cat will dig into the water and make you go more vertical. And so to be able to jump to the front, but then have that back released, I think is important. And so, hell yeah. And this kind of just motivating me to even, to really also, well, because my prototype, I'll be able to add sponson material. It really needs sponsoned material to actually stabilize it. So, and I can actually make it square. Right now, I could turn my my prototype into a very rectangular, and so not underfoot, but overhead. The overhead view would be rectangular. Underfoot, very round, basketball shaped, edgeable, stuff like that. And so, hell yeah. All right, so I think we're going to be done with this one. I don't think there's, yeah, I guess we just have a little rapid, but hell yeah. And then just, so what I will talk about, like right here, is with an R1 boat. A lot of, so the short strokes, and that is what I wanted to look at. And for part 2, is like how far back do I actually need to paddle, and where am I? See right there where my hand is stopping? My hand is stopping before this strap, and I'm doing my paddle pry right there. And I'm heavily leaning the boat and paddle prying. And so what I think is that you do want a long water line, longer, right in the center of the boat, just like almost like a kayak. So the whitewater kayaks that are fast, you want that feeling to be at the neutral location. And I'm actually surprised of how, see, that bugs the heck out of me that pops up. But see that orange thwart? I'm not sitting back on it. So I do a lot of, I'm doing most my ferrying from this position. And so I can at least get to here, which is fairly mid in the boat. And so that's surprising to me. And I'm bracing right here before the back. And I got to end this video for other reasons. Hell yeah. But yeah, so this is very motivating. And so when I do sit on this, the boat has to feel long and fast. Even though I'm trying to make shorter boats, the boat has to effectively be planing, long, and fast. And then it has to have one contact here and then one contact at the center. And those two contacts have to be spaced far apart. The farther those two contacts from the center to out here are apart, that's really going to drive your stability. My current prototype is way too rounded like a basketball, and there is no feeling of like, oh, right there, like I've hit a stability point. Because this center I-beam is pushed out, now I have a tipping point on that I-beam, but I have a flat surface from this I-beam out to the center of this radius. And it just happens that a perfect radius over here is useful for the geometry of just sitting on and knowing that you shouldn't be going farther. If you do go farther, you're going to slip off or edge the boat more. But I do want to act. There's times where if you're on a wave face, you need to edge this thing and it's too heavy. It's going to flop down. Especially on the RMR like Thundercloud. That thing is extra wide, where if you actually did need to edge it, you would have to really catamaran it, and do that. But I think the actual rounded tube is pretty good for a displacing surface. Hell yeah. I don't know if you'd actually, but I think you could make it, especially near the water line. You could play around with, its edgeability and stuff like that, whether you'd want it to look like a kayak or the rounded tube anyway. But a lot of that comes from the floor being protruded just a little bit, being able to edge on this, and for sure potentially having the lowest point right at the center, because then you have this flat surface when you do edge, and hopefully that can get it faster. All right, I gotta be done with this video. Thanks for joining me. Booyah.